NASCAR Overtime is continuing to be a bit of a debate throughout the NASCAR fandom through this season. 2024 has been absolutely insane, but it's amazing that after 20 years of different iterations, NASCAR Overtime still is something this controversial. With over 150 in cups since its implementation, you'd be surprised to know that 12 of those have happened in the last 28 races through the 2024 season. And this is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about this year, and I want to talk about overall, and kind of look more in depth at this debate. Because I think that actually, if different sides looked at it objectively, there are some pretty good points each way. So, starting out in 2024, 12 of the 28 races so far this season have been run into overtime, which is a record already, with 8 races remaining, and I guarantee we'll probably have 3 or 4 more of them by the end of the season. And that's not even including Xfinity or trucks. 7 of the 12 I don't think have had any outright controversy whatsoever. In fact, there's actually been some positive ones. This past week at Watkins Glen had an amazing battle between SVG and Chris Buescher, one that a lot of people brought up as a reason of saying, hey, you really want to get rid of this? And I think they have a point. It would not have happened without NASCAR Overtime. Same goes for the closest finish in NASCAR Cup Series history at Kansas, 1/1000th of a second between Kyle Larson and, again, Chris Buescher. And they have a point. It's true. This would not have happened without NASCAR Overtime, and as we'll talk about in a bit, some of the biggest moments in recent NASCAR history wouldn't have happened either. Now, one with Daytona has been controversial due to the playoffs, but overall pretty positive, and that is Harrison Burton's win at Daytona. 4 of these, though, have been the poster child of controversy for this year and overtime denialists alike. First off, we have the first Richmond race. This is the one where Denny Hamlin jumped the restart, clearly jumped it, was not penalized and got the win, and Martin Truex Jr. had a bit of a meltdown afterwards. Truex wouldn't have won with the bad restart he had either way, but still, it's pretty shocking to see such a pretty obvious penalty not be called. Of course, we have Nashville after that later in the summer. 5 overtimes in this one, an absolute farce if there ever was one to finish a race, and a complete shuffle of the grid that was not in any way indicative of who was actually good that day and night. Joey Logano won it, and has since advanced in the playoffs, even though this season has not been playoff caliber in any sense of the word from the 22 team. Then you had the Brickyard. The caution came out after the white flag, ending the race under caution, even though the entire point of overtime is to end it under green. And this was controversial not because of that, but more because Kyle Larson had already passed the line when Priest was stopped for a solid 30-40 seconds, and it was obvious he wasn't going to get back going again. And then I think the biggest one, and this is the one that has made this argument, I think, a byline and a through line of the entire season, is the second Richmond race, when Austin Dillon plows through Joey Logano and then intent wrecks Denny Hamlin. Now, he lost playoff eligibility for it, but it was clear that overtime in the playoffs, 2 things that NASCAR fans debate heavily to this day, were definitely involved in this. Now, looking back is something I would say would be important too. As I said, 2024 has had the most overtime since the implementation of this kind of rule, and there's 8 races left. But, again, it's an outlier. What about the good stuff that has happened in the past and the bad stuff that's happened? Let's start on a positive note. Some of the good things that have happened since implementing an overtime green-white checker, whatever you want to call it, type of rule, are as follows. First off, you have Dale Jarrett's final win in 2005 at Talladega. This would not have happened without overtime. And it's something that, to this day, a lot of old-time fans who have been against overtime still look back on fondly, as it's one of those heroes from that 90s, early 2000s era that got their final hurrah. 2007 had a couple big ones too. Kevin Harvick had one of the closest finishes in NASCAR history for the Daytona 500. A absolutely insane finish with a giant flip, wreck in the back, all of this with a photo finish. It was like it came right out of Days of Thunder. And Kyle Busch's first win at the COT, while he would have won anyway without the overtime, was even closer, with Jeff Burton being right there at the finish, and then Kyle Busch having his famous "they suck" comment about the car. 2010, when they had bumped it up from 1 to 3 attempts, well, that had an amazing 500 finish, with Jamie McMurray managing to get ahead of Kevin Harvick and Greg Biffle, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. firing himself through the pack on the final lap from 10th to 2nd to challenge Jamie Mack. Jamie Mack would be on the losing end at Talladega when, for the first time, NASCAR had 3 overtime attempts used, with Kevin Harvick barely getting him at the line and living up to the name of the closer. 2011 had a couple as well. For instance, you have Trevor Bayne, David Reagan, and Regan Smith's first wins, all during overtime finishes and duels at the finish of these races. You also had the 600 finish, a wild one where Dale Jr. looked to be snapping a huge 100-race-plus winless streak, only to run out of fuel and Kevin Harvick to close once again. So there's some big ones there. Jimmy Johnson's 7th title was won, and the race was won under overtime. William Byron's first win, someone who looks to be a superstar in the making for NASCAR, came in overtime at Daytona. And like we said before, the Kansas and Watkins Glen finishes. Those were pretty damn good. Now, for every one that's good, fans can look back and say there's some bad ones. That 2007 finish with Kevin Harvick and Mark Martin, I would argue would be even more iconic, even finishing under yellow, if Mark Martin had won that race. Yes, Harvick is one of the top 15 best drivers of all time, but Mark Martin is beloved by just about every generation. He wins the Daytona 500. That race is right up there with Dale Sr.'s win in the Daytona 500. In 2008, Regan Smith with the Talladega fiasco. Something that could have happened without overtime, but still was given the opportunity. You had Wreckfest starting in 2010 thanks to having so many overtimes with Atlanta and Talladega. And in 2012, you had actually a really crazy and good story completely destroyed at the end of the race, with Hendrick Motorsports at the time of the advertised distance at Martinsville having a 1-2-3 finish with Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, and Dale Jr. for Mr. H's 200th win. Ultimately, it'd go up in smoke and Ryan Newman would get the win. And later that year, that big wreck at Talladega in overtime would give Dale Jr. a concussion that quickly led to the end of his career. Austin Dillon's flip in 2015 was under overtime, and because of the changed rules with that, you had the insane and stupid Talladega fiasco, where Joey Logano and Dale Jr. didn't get even the chance to race for the win, thanks to Kevin Harvick intentionally wrecking the field so that he could advance in a dying race car. Of course, there's some other ones. 2018, Dillon wrecks Almirola for the 500 win, and Ryan Newman almost gets killed in the 500 with an insane flip and crash. Plus, later that year, the yellow line debacle in overtime with Hamlin and Matt Benedetto. Indy's road course has devolved into chaos due to overtime before. And of course, you have guys like Kyle Busch, who lost maybe his only possibility in 2023 at a Daytona 500 win. So those are good and bad, and all of it is subjective in opinion, but what are we looking at overall? Well, overall, I'll say this. The conversation is being driven by recency bias at this time. We've had so many overtimes in such a short amount of time, it has completely dominated the conversation, and I think we need a little breathing room, whether it be the off-season or a couple clean races to end off the season, before we can have a real conversation about this with any substance. Like it or not, there is no clear answer to this that's concise or on the right side. I am one for finishing at regulation, but I also can see the downsides in that, and there are some major ones that would leave fans pretty pissed, as we saw towards the end of that rules era in 2004. At the same time, I can see why people would like having every shot. You pay a lot of money either for television or attendance, you're wanting to see the race finish under green. I get it. For every SVG versus Buescher, there's Austin Dillon wrecking the leaders. And with that, it could happen under any circumstance. Drivers' rules in NASCAR as a whole can influence overtime as much as any rule that overtime has at that point of the race, or any rule can influence at any other point of the race. No matter what, we're still going to debate. We're never going to agree. So I'm just going to ask you what you prefer. Do you prefer 1 overtime, 3 unlimited, or finishing at regulation? Or do you think we should just completely do away with all of this stuff and have something completely new? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support. And until next time, have a good one.